Mark get on the stage with me here. So Mark Huber from Metadata, they recently did a rebrand for their B2B SaaS company. And in my experience of 10 years of being in B2B marketing, it's usually a terrible thing to do is to rebrand and redesign your website, because what most often happens is like you spend insane amount of money and then the results are, if you get lucky, no different or usually worse. So let's see how Mark navigated it. Mark, thank you for being here.
Awesome. I'm pumped for this one. Thanks for having me. So my name is Mark Huber. I'm a director of growth at Metadata. At Metadata, we are big believers of not pitch slapping people. Pitch slapping is whenever you get that favorite LinkedIn message where somebody wants to connect and immediately sell you your product. I'm not going to be doing that here, but in full transparency, you will see some of the stuff that we ran as paid campaign experiments using our own platform. So there will be some occasional product shots here. So first things first, we are a demand generation platform that helps B2B marketers run campaign experiments that optimize to revenue. So if you're not familiar with Metadata, that's all I'll share here. So I joined Metadata in August of 2020. And prior to Metadata, I was actually a first-time customer for about 9.5 months or so. And I had used 2 different ABM platforms prior to joining Metadata, and I demoed Metadata. It was the first demo that I actually enjoyed at the 11th hour. This would have been December 2019-ish. And when I got onto that demo, there were what I like to call holy shit moments, where it was just, holy shit, this product exists. I didn't know that there was something like this. This is amazing. How do more people not know about this? Well, if you were to go to the website, this is what the website looked like up until I'd say late 2020. And this is what I inherited when I joined Metadata as the second full-time marketer. So I share this because the experience that our prospects and our customers were having in the platform itself did not mirror what our brand showed the market. So as a second hire on the marketing team, what I did not want to do was let's redesign the website right away. That's something that I feel like a lot of B2B marketers make that mistake, and it's an expensive mistake to make. So what we started to do over time was we started to experiment with messaging, our design, and copy, and we'll walk through how we went from this to this. So this does not happen overnight. It's a gradual process. It requires a lot of testing and experimentation, and I'm excited to show you all of the time and effort and frustration and occasional bourbon that made me get through this process. So one of the things that Pat mentioned at the beginning of this was most rebrands are really expensive, usually done by very large teams, and oftentimes take a very long time and usually past the expected timeline to complete. So I'm sharing these 3 points not because I'm looking for any pity. It's not a sob story, but I'm trying to show anyone else who's listening or who watches this afterwards that you can do this well with limited resources. You just have to be really scrappy with how you go about doing it. So we only had 2 full-time marketers at the time of undergoing this big rebrand. We just hired our 3rd full-time marketer recently, which we're excited about, but it was just Jason Widdop, our VP of marketing, and myself. And prior to me joining Metadata, Jason had actually redone the website, migrating from Wix to WordPress. So it was a pretty tough sell for me to say, hey, Jason, I think we need to rebrand the company, after he had just sunk some money into it. So because of that, we also had limited budget. I did not have, Gong just launched a rebrand today. SalesLoft just launched a rebrand today. I didn't have anywhere near that budget as any of those companies did. We're a Series A company right now, so I won't share the exact number because Algert, the agency that we worked with, I know did us a solid, but know that it was low 5 figures, so it can be done. And then the third point being timeline. So this was probably the most aggressive part of it all. Was we only had about 3-ish months to complete it. So I think I posted yesterday, it was close to 94 days, I think, in reality, but 90 days sounded better for the hook, and we're marketers here. So I felt fine telling that white lie. But I tell you all of this because these were the constraints that we had to work with. And I think I didn't recognize it at the time, but those constraints helped us become much more creative and scrappy throughout the process. So I wanted to break it up a little bit, but giddy up, as Kramer would say. And where do you get started? So I thought when I was starting this project that it was going to start with the website. And when I say start with the website, I thought I knew what we needed to create. I thought we knew what we needed to say. I thought we knew how to say it. I thought we had all of those details fleshed out. And when Jason pushed me on it, and I'm thankful that he pushed me on it, it became more clear to me that I wasn't nearly as confident as I should be in all of those different inputs for a big rebrand. Because if we would have started with the website from the start, we would have failed miserably. So I hope you take quite a few things away from this presentation. But if there's one thing that you take away and nothing else, if you are undergoing a rebrand, 100% do not start with the website. And why is that? Well, first thing, whenever you're starting with a website, you 100% need to start with the copy. And I think that's a huge thing that people often overlook. And I say that because if you let the design inform the copy then becomes a secondary component of what you're really trying to communicate to your audience when they get to the website. And knowing how this process played out, and Algert, the creative agency that we worked with and has been a really good partner for us, they even said having the copy first did us wonders. Now, you can't start with a copy if you don't know what to say. And I know a lot of the presentations today at Winter Games are around experimentation with messaging. And I know previous sessions at Winter Games have been around positioning and messaging. And this was something that we had to undergo ourselves because we really didn't know what we needed to say and how we should talk about ourselves. And then the third point being, this was a huge lesson learned for me. And I think this was more reflective of where we started as a company. It was always about us and what we wanted to say. And the reality is, in your messaging, in your website copy, in your marketing campaigns, no one really cares what you have to say about yourself and your company. It's all about what your audience wants to hear. So the big challenge is trying to find the balance between both of those, when you're coming up with messaging and the copy for your website. So where do you actually get started? You have to know what to say. And I think the second thing that I'd love for you to take away from this is that in order to do that well, you can meet with customers, you can meet with prospects, and I would definitely recommend that you do that. But you should meet with your CAB. If you aren't familiar with CABs, Slack me or send me a note on LinkedIn or email me. I will share everything that you need to know about setting up a customer advisory board, because our customer advisory board is a mix of about 15 or so marketers at different stage companies with different seniority levels. And that is our cheat code for testing and experimenting with things before we actually bring them to market. So throughout this entire process, our CAB was super important to us. Our customers, whether they were longtime customers, new customers, or late or early stage prospects, I met with a ton of different people because I was trying to get a spectrum of people who had different awareness and knowledge levels of metadata, and trying to blend all of those perspectives together. Now, the second point is, I think when people go into those interviews, with customers or anyone really in your target audience, they usually go in with a list of 20 questions. And they're so focused on getting all the way through the questions that it doesn't really leave room for good discussion. It's very robotic, it doesn't flow naturally, and you end up doing almost just as much talking, if not more talking, than the people who matter, your audience. So what I would suggest that you do when you go into these conversations is that you let them do the talking. Like, actually, you'd be amazed at how much more insight you get from letting them do the talking. And the real beauty is in some of those follow-up questions and some of the things that you did not script before. And then the third thing, this is pretty obvious, but in having all of those different interviews, we recorded them, we used Chorus, and I transcribed a lot of what was said in there, and started to identify what were the things that kept coming up consistently, the themes, the benefits, the pain points. all of the stuff that, every good product marketer would, say you need to focus on as you're building out your messaging and how to go to market. And this was super important for us because we did not have that foundation in place. So you've got this foundation, and then you need to test this foundation out. And by way of doing that, what you absolutely cannot do is focus on you and your tech. So if you were to look at the Metadata website, earlier this year and even in previous years, you'd find a whole lot of language that was focused on us, our tech, the technical components to it. And that's not what resonated with our audience. That's not what they were interested in. They didn't really care. It was entirely focused on us. It was not focused on them. So again, you need to flip the focus of what you're writing about and what you're trying to communicate and focus almost exclusively on your audience, which brings me to my next point. So you need to use the same words that your audience is using. As marketers, we love to overcomplicate things. We love to kind of tease what the new way looks like and, bring people to that new way. And it's not to say that you can't do that, but if you're only using, language in the future, you're not using the language and the words that your audience is using. And that will ultimately, fall flat with the people that matter most. And then the third thing, this was the most challenging part for me throughout this entire process, is explaining all of this in as few words as possible. So how I would go about this, and you'll see some of the screenshots of, I think it's on the next slide, of just how we went about experimenting and testing with this. I'd go through drafts, I'd get feedback, I'd revise it. And then as soon as I felt like it was really, really good, I would go back to it and try and cut out words that were unnecessary and saying in it as few words as possible. So testing. So a couple different things up here. And again, feel free to reach out afterwards. I can walk you through this in more detail. So the top left screenshot and the bottom right screenshot are actually screenshots from our own platform. And what we were doing was we were running paid campaign experiments using some of the kind of interim creative that we have with some of the messaging, our target audiences that we were trying to get in front of, and then the offer that we were promoting. So with metadata, again, no pitch slapping, but what we do is it's multivariate experimentation, and you combine all of those different combinations to see what performs best for your audience. And that was kind of a cheat code for us. Bottom left, I know I'm at Winter Games right now, so you don't need to be sold on Winter, but we did use Winter as we were going through this process for a very specific use case. And we felt like we had a ton of really good feedback and insight from many of the audiences that we knew personally, but there was a ton of value in getting feedback from a cold audience who, for the most part, had no real idea who metadata is or what metadata does. So it forced us to go back to the drawing board once we thought we had really sound messaging and copy that we were going to be rolling out for this new website redesign, and revisit it. How can we make it more simple? How can we change the words that we're using and really make sure that it lands? And then in the top right, this is just a screenshot from one of the original website copy docs that I had created. So this is Kaylee Edmondson, actually. She's one of our cab members. She works at Chili Piper. What we would do is I would come up with individual copies of the same exact docs for each of our cab members, and we would send them out. We would get all of their feedback. I would consolidate the feedback and start to see what were some of the things that were coming up consistently, either good or bad, and then trying to make revisions, in batches, as opposed to revising each and every time after one of our cab members, had provided feedback. So we've talked a lot about the original messaging that informed the copy. What about the design? I never thought that I'd include a Marilyn Monroe quote. I don't even know if this quote is real, but it works for this presentation. If you can't handle me at my worst, then you sure as hell don't deserve me at my best. And why am I showing you this? Well, this is where we started from. This is what I inherited. You can't ever forget where you came from. But as you can see, for a company that is, a high growth Series A company right now, this is what we were working with. And marketers have a very high bar. And if this is what we were trying to use to attract them, like, we realized that this was just not going to do it. So It worked for us then. It wasn't going to work for us in time. I love looking back at this to remember where you came from, but you don't go from this to this overnight. This is some of the most recent website creative that we have, some of the recent ad creative that we have, and Algert, our agency, has been a huge force in helping us take it to the next level and really get us out of our comfort zone when it comes to testing and experimenting with new ad creative. So you don't do this overnight without some of this. And here are some of the concepts that we started to introduce, before we kicked off this website redesign project into market. So we were actually testing these sets of ad creative on paid social campaigns, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn, and even some display work. And when working with Algert, we were basically trying to put some guardrails in place of, this is where we are right now. This is where we want to take it. Get us uncomfortable, show us things, let's test and learn, using some of the quantitative data that we have on our platform, and start to see what was working and what was resonating with our audience. So how do we get there? The whole theme of this Winter Games, you need to test and iterate a lot. So the first point that we have here, it was a really big thing that I had to learn and I had to get more comfortable with. And I thank Algert and his team for that. It's getting imperfect concepts into market. Now, it's not to say that you should just get really shitty design things out into the market, but don't wait till everything is pixel perfect. It's better to ship things and get them out there and start to test and see what's working and what's not working, and see those results, and then begin to build and layer onto all of those details. The second thing, and this is one of the things that I've loved about this entire process, is taking design risks so you can stand out. I'm a big believer of, if you went to most B2B websites out there, you'd see that they all look and sound the same. And if you covered the logo up, you can't really tell the difference between the two. So one of the things that we looked as a huge opportunity for us was, how could we take big calculated risks and experiment with those risks as a way for us to stand out? And then the third, don't do design by committee. Algert was actually one of the founding members of Drift and the first, I think, creative director there. So a lot of what we're doing in here at Metadata is stuff that he's seen work before. So he said, early days, Dave Gerhardt owned the design keys of the castle. Algert was designing a lot of this stuff. He was making decisions, quick decisions too. The bigger decisions he would get some input on, but he didn't do design by committee. And I think that was something that was super helpful for us, because it helped speed up our experimentation process and what we were able to get to market. So how do we get this right before we launched? It had nothing to do with Shooter McGavin, but I love that gif. A few quick things. We measured what we could. So not everything in this process you can measure quantitatively, but we did look at some of the quantitative metrics from our paid social campaigns in Metadata. So looking at the specific audiences with the people that we were targeting, the job titles, the seniority levels, and how specific messages and ad creative were resonating with them or not resonating. The second part was, and this was something that I had to fight for internally quite a bit, the qualitative feedback from our audience at the end of the day was just as important in my eyes. So whether it was the customer interviews that we were doing, our cab interviews, the findings from winter, you need to find the right balance between stuff that you can quantify and stuff that you can't quantify. And without that, you won't get this right. And then the third point being, I thought that this was going to land really well the night before we launched it. We launched it, I think it was on April 14th, earlier this year. I was nervous as hell how this was going to be received. And that was still with all the work that I had put into this, but we trusted our gut. I knew that we did as much as we possibly could to make sure that it was going to land, and it did. And then the second part of that is we continue to test. So this is something that, we're going to be introducing a kind of a 2.0 brand to Metadata in the coming weeks and months. So it's not something that you just set it and forget it like Ron Popeil with the old bad infomercials, but you have to continue to test. And then the last thing here, we're in B2B marketing, we're held accountable to pipeline and revenue. It can't just look cool and sound great. It actually has to perform too. So from a sales qualified opportunity perspective, the amount of pipeline that we've been generating and the average deal size, this is some of the performance increase that we've seen, and we feel like we're just getting started here.
Awesome. So I have a couple of questions before we get to the audience stuff.
Let's do it.
which specific metrics were you paying attention to when you were like comparing the before and after?
Yep.
And can you also share maybe like what were the results?
Yep. So for the specific experiments that we were running in metadata, we were looking at the actual just impressions of seeing like, was our audience actually seeing this as like a leading indicator? And then we were looking at a combination of the click-through rate of just, were we getting people to the site? And then for some of these landing pages that we were doing, we were stitching together data in GA to see what they were doing and really how much of the content were they consuming on those individual landing pages. As far as the actual performance metrics go, we were trying to see content consumption, and really scroll depth is a big one for us. So of these new messages that we were trying to introduce to the market, how much of that were they consuming on any given page?
But scroll depth is as a means to an end, and it doesn't really necessarily translate into more money, leads, whatever.
Yep. Yeah, so that was more so just like as we were kind of testing and experimenting with these things before we actually launched with the website. But once we launched the website, I mean, we're held accountable to sales qualified opportunities, pipeline, and revenue. So we were looking over the previous period, how many more demos were being requested, like what was the sales cycle looking like, because we thought we created so much more content to address some of the concerns that people had before, and just shortening the sales cycle for our team. So those were more of the lagging indicators. But when we were testing and experimenting things, we were looking in platform to see how people were responding.
Gotcha. So you guys getting more demo requests now?
We are. Never enough demos, but yes, we are definitely, you can't get a demo through our own website unless you qualify. We're kind of maniacal about qualifying and disqualifying people, but it is trending very much in the right direction.
Well, Patrick is also asking a more laser-focused question here. Is like, how did MQLs and SQLs improve with the design and message change?
Yeah, so I wish I could tell you that, Patrick, but we actually don't measure MQLs and SQLs. We're all about stage one opportunities, which are stage one qualified opportunities by our sales team, pipeline, and revenue. So we look at demo requests really as like, I would say, the equivalent to MQLs or SQLs. It's just the leading indicator, but we're all about pipeline and revenue.
Laura is asking, can you give us a recommendation about how to record, how to have a record of these tests? Maybe some best practices.
Yep. So we're using our own tool for like the ad experimentation component to it. So you can definitely do this in the platforms. It just takes you, much longer to set those experiments up. So what we would do is we would have a weekly meeting with our ad ops team, and we would just look at the initial ad performance of how each experiment was performing relative to the others. Now for some of like the qualitative tests, it's more of, you've interviewed this many people, how many of these themes consistently keep bringing themselves up? What are the findings that keep reappearing? And I would say it's more pattern recognition. So again, with a limited team and like scope that we had, it was not super scientific, if you will, but it was finding the balance between the stuff that you can quantify and the qualitative things that kept coming up.
Right. Yeah. In my personal experience, after being 10 years in experimentation, is that if absolutely, if you have the traffic and the volume to measure precisely,
and we did not, which is why we were forced to measure things more qualitatively.
Most B2B companies don't, unless like we're talking like really giant companies here. Yeah. And so then really you want to look at what I say a safe ballpark is a 20% improvement, because you have normal fluctuation in like conversion rate. Like I want to say 10-15% week over week is normal. So if you got 10% better, it's hard to know if it was because of Tuesday or the change you made, right? But above 20%, it's probably because of the changes you made. Wazim is asking, after the launch, how confident are you to keep the design as it is now? Would you keep on experimenting the design elements launched already across the website?
I love that question because we're not confident in it. We want to keep pushing it. We want to keep experimenting with it. And it's a gradual process for us. So the way that we work with Algert and his team, we're constantly looking at ways that we can take the current design, whether it's pages on the website or ad creative, and keep pushing it. And the way that I describe it with him is, I'll tell you when I'm going to tap out and say uncle, but until I say that, like, we're going to keep experimenting and keep pushing how crazy, some of the concepts are. And we've got some cool stuff coming.
And I would add here that the idea that you should do radical redesigns as a way to improve designs is like outdated thinking. Like,
yes, I don't want to ever do that again.
There's a time and place for it if the existing website is just bad in so many levels that fixing it one by one would take forever.
Yep.
But if you have a solid foundation, the whole website, let's call it redesign, should happen piece by piece, line by line, pixel by pixel. I mean, look at Amazon. If you open up their like website from 2001, it looks pretty much the same as it looks today. I mean, it's better now, but like fundamentally, they've improved it one pixel at a time, really.
Yep.
Patrick has another question. How has this methodology changed other aspects of the business, or how you look at the overall brand and website?
So I would say it's a little unique to us because our CEO, Gil Lush, is, an engineer by trade turned CEO of a company that just has an experimentation platform. So like, experimentation is in our core DNA. We are actually on the hook as a small little marketing team for completing, a certain number of experiments each month. So for us, I wouldn't say it's changed that much because it's just so core to who we are, and it's expected to be in our, day-to-day, and something we're consistently doing.
John is asking here, do you experiment with changing the offer? And does that often make a big difference?
So it does, but I think in our own experience, and John, I love the question. I'll Slack you after about this or send you a LinkedIn message. We found that the audience usually is the biggest factor in that equation for us. So we tend to start with the audience first. And then once we tweak the audience, then we'll go to the ad creative, and then we'll go to the offer. It's a little difficult for us. We're taking more of a new age marketing approach. So we really don't gate a lot of things ourselves. We're looking to give away everything and play the long game. So for some of our customers that are still gating things, they'll pay more attention to the offer itself. But we have a few offers that we use, and we focus more on the audience first.
Gotcha. And Sam is asking, well, what if you don't have a solid foundation? I guess referring to the website.
Good luck. No, I would say work towards that solid foundation. Like, how Pep was just describing it. I think even if you were to talk to Albert around this website redesign that we did with him, the goal was to get to a solid foundation first, and then just to continually expand on that foundation. So I think I wouldn't try to, jump ahead to some crazy, redesign or rebrand unless you have a foundation in place. And I think the foundation too, just so we're clear, it's not just the look and the feel and the copy. There was a lot of stuff that happened in the back end of WordPress to make sure that like we had all the stuff that you don't see in place, so that we could easily test and experiment with things on the website in time.
Beautiful. And we're out of time. Mark, thank you so much. Everybody connect with Mark on LinkedIn. See you around, dude.
Yep. I appreciate it.